Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review. I am your host, as usual, Adesoji Iginla. With me, back from a well-needed rest, is Comrade Milton Allimadi. He is the host, CBAI, editor of Black Star News, the author of How the West Manufactured Hate, which is currently undergoing a revamp, and you should see an updated copy shortly.
Yes,
And
perhaps even a different title, actually.
okay, so
I got my contract back
okay.
after 3 years of fighting with my publisher. But the contract allows the publisher to continue selling whatever they already had printed, you see?
Okay.
So I don't want to be marketing something with the exact same title,
Okay.
and then they would benefit from that as well.
Okay, so
Since they didn't want to promote my book,
interesting.
clearly, I suspect they were trying to suppress sales because the sales were high when it first was published. Why should I be helping them? You see what I'm saying?
I get it.
So that's why I'm actually thinking a new title also, and that everybody that is interested in the book would go exactly to what they're ordering and not mistakenly buy the version.
By the old, yes,
exactly.
Okay, okay.
So I'm thinking that, and I'll let you know what I decide.
Okay.
But thank you for mentioning that.
No problem. More into your pen, as they would say. So yes, welcome back from your well-needed rest. Hope you're...
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah. So without further ado, we'll go into... I should do the protocol. In terms of the United States, what's the major news burning?
Well, the major news of interest to me, there are two actually, obviously. One is that Trump has now scheduled a meeting, I believe it's next Friday.
Okay.
With Putin.
Okay.
And what I think is going to come out of that, because he is now very motivated and believes that he can actually win the Nobel Peace Prize, right? So I think he is going to make a deal with Putin to end this war. So what he's going to do is going to say the U.S., and obviously he can't force the issue because all he has to do is just stop providing any intelligence and weapons to Ukraine, and Europe collectively cannot, fill up that void.
Yes.
So he's going to make a deal with Putin, I suspect, and Russia will be able to keep the territory that it has already conquered.
Really?
Obviously, there's a little bit of a difficulty because I think Putin wants to conquer a little more territory before. So that might be the only issue. But I think he's made up his mind to accept that Russia will keep what it has conquered, keep what it has annexed, which is, of course, Crimea. Then he will announce a ceasefire, even though, of course, Ukraine is not a part of this meeting that's coming on Friday. And Europe, I was reading something in the New York Times that European leaders are opposed. They want something that does not remove the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO in the future. That's not going to happen with Trump.
Definitely not.
So that, to me, is one major interesting news. And then the second one is domestic. Candidate Andrew Cuomo, who's also running, the former governor of New York, who was defeated in the Democratic primaries by Zohan Mamdani, is now in a total panic mode. Apparently, he had been having some conversations with Trump, and he's saying, we didn't discuss the election. Complete BS, of course. And
Okay.
the fact that they discussed the election is now clear because Trump is now saying that if a quote unquote communist, he doesn't know anything, the difference between a communist and socialist.
Okay.
So if a communist wins in New York, just think about it. We might take control of New York City. You can't do that. The Constitution doesn't allow that. He doesn't even know, you know, the powers of the presidency, right?
Yeah, but who planted that idea in his head, though?
I mean, the fact, it just shows what kind of devious person Cuomo is. He thinks, Cuomo knows, of course, that Trump cannot do that. But he's thinking, this is how perverted his thinking has become, I believe. That will scare enough people into voting for him. That goes when you completely lost your marbles. In fact, it'll do the opposite. It'll increase the margin of Mamdani's victory, in my view. So those to me are the interesting two items of the week.
Okay, in the UK, the most interesting story of the week was a protest that happened yesterday, and that ties in with the story we're going to read at the end. So I'll save because
Okay.
you would see how it rhymes up. So
Okay.
speaking
Very
of
good.
speaking of stories, the first one from today comes from The Guardian, and it reads assault. It reads assault on Sudan's Zamzam refugee camp may have killed more than 1,500 civilians. Guardian investigation finds number killed in April attack by rapid support forces far greater than current estimates. There is a quote there, they slaughtered us like animals, the inside stories of how one of the biggest atrocities of the Sudan war unfolded in Zamzam. Zamzam is a refugee camp, and more than 1,500 civilians may have been massacred during an attack on the Sudanese largest displacement camp in April, and what could be the second biggest war crime of the country's catastrophic conflict. A Guardian investigation into the 72-hour attack by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces on North Darfur Zamzam camp, the country's largest for people displaced by the war, found repeated testimony of mass executions, large-scale abductions. Hundreds of civilians remain unaccounted for. So the genesis of the war began between the Arab-led RSF and the Sudanese military, which broke out in April 2023, has been categorized by repeated atrocities, forcing millions from their homes and causing the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Your initial take with the angle posed by the headline.
Okay. So and that obviously to me is the purpose of that article, is to try to, reignite more global interest in this war and to try to sort of like spark intervention, right?
Yep.
Now, the intervention of what nature is not clear in a war like this, where you have like two fully equipped armies
True.
fighting, right?
Yep.
But obviously, I mean, the ammunition they don't manufacture, right? Comes from outside.
Correct.
The weapons they're still getting weapons,
Somehow.
and they have a lot of weapons already, right? But at some point, you need ammunition. So the fact that they're still getting weapons and ammunition, that is the major problem. And that's where the outside world can intervene in this war. So is this newsworthy? I would say yes, because anything that reminds the world that, yes, there are a lot of wars going on at this time. Gaza is a total catastrophe. At the same time, there's still another catastrophe continuing in Sudan. So for that purpose, I can see why they would play out revelations such as this. And I imagine this is not the only revelation that is awaiting in this very vicious fighting that is going on in Sudan. I imagine there have been many undercounts of massacres that have occurred since this fighting exploded in April 2023. So for that purpose, yes. And obviously, it's very sad because when you have two people with equally equipped armies, right? They call the RSF a militia. That's not really a militia, that's an armed force. A militia does not have armored vehicles, you see? Artillery, right?
Yeah.
A radio communication, everything that a regular standing army has. So that is why the war has been so destructive and has taken such a long time. So now it's also another problem because there are not really any, the RSF, based on reporting, have committed many more massacres. So it's a question of degrees because the National Army itself has also been committing massacres and, with indiscriminate bombing, leading to many deaths of civilians. So, because it would be a bit easier if one side was so blatantly awful that you could rally the outside world against it and give whatever support to the side that it does not appear to be bad, quote unquote, so that it can win militarily, absent any willingness to negotiate on both sides. But that is, as I said, a matter of, when you start talking about degrees of how awful each side is, that's not a good sign. But at the end of the day, it seems to me that there's still going to have to be a lot of outside force imposed on both sides because they're the ones that disrupted the civilian process, which was evolving in Sudan, so that the civilians, the activists, the students, the workers, the professionals, they can form the civilian government, which they were already in the process of forming until these two generals hijacked, the process. The United States, of course, because a lot of the weapons comes from the oil-rich Gulf countries. And, Trump is friends with them. And you know what? Actually, don't be shocked. Because as I said earlier, he's very vested now in winning the Nobel, campaigning for it openly. His supporters, the White House, every time, there was I didn't even know there was a war going on between Azerbaijan and I forget who. But the White House sent me a press release the other day that, Trump brokered another amazing, peace deal and had the presidents, of Azerbaijan, and I'm sorry, I forgot who they're fighting with, in the White House. So that's the kind of press release we're going to be getting on a regular basis. So I suspect, and he actually mentioned it in July. He said, I think he said like a nasty situation going on in Sudan, and we're going to become involved in that. So I imagine that if he does put his weight on the Gulf world-rich countries to say, listen, stop providing them weapons, I think something would happen. And something, since he wants the Nobel Peace Prize so badly, that could be enough motivation for the U.S. to take an active role, which would be very ironic because, and the same thing applies to Rwanda and Congo as well. Not only does the U.S. want to continue getting the minerals, but as I said, they were getting minerals anyway, but they were getting it in a very vicious way by supporting Uganda and Rwanda to just steal it. But Trump is now saying, okay, we're going to get it above board in return for me brokering this peace deal. That's one aspect of the motivation. The other aspect is also the Nobel Peace Prize. So now if I were, people in Cameroon, the Cameroon activists, they should say, listen, there are many other wars to help you win this peace prize. What about Cameroon? You see? And here's the, we are laughing, but here's the irony. If it results in the end of fighting, then he would have done much, much better than the Democrats. And that is the irony of the whole thing.
Yeah, but I suppose the motivation for him is not altruistic. It's because of the eye on the prize.
Absolutely. But it doesn't matter. The outcome would be he ended a war that the Democrats, made no serious effort to end. And that is an indictment that a person like this who defies laws domestically and international law could come and end these conflicts. Then you have to really question what it means to be a Democrat.
So, a quick question for you before we move on. So, how does the violence in this camp connect to the colonial era construction of racial and ethnic hierarchy in Sudan? And what lessons can African states draw from the failure to protect Darfur? Because Darfur was in the headline a couple of decades ago. Displaced communities, despite decades of warning. Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Yeah, but this is not a unique problem. It's pretty much every African country employs the same tactic, ethnic divide and rule. Now, in this case, it happens to be ethnic plus quote unquote racial as well, using the different pigmentations to highlight the same thing that African countries, misrulers have done, dividing people from the north, one country against the south. You know, we've had that in Uganda. You have that in Nigeria as well. They have that in Cameroon right now. We just mentioned Cameroon. So that's a bigger problem than just, than Sudan. It's ironic that sometimes we as Africans get, all excited when the pigmentation is what is used as the focus to divide and rule. But there's no difference between that, whether they have same pigmentation if you're using, or you come from this region, you come from that region, come from this ethnic group, it's just a disaster, and Nkrumah anticipated this. And that's why he said these meaningless borders have got to go so that Africans can really learn to live as Africans, something that, of course, colonialism did not want. So we still have the same, colonial practice in place, using this divide and rule in order to maintain power. So that's a problem.
Yes. Speaking of Sudan and especially that region, for those who want to understand that neck of the woods, so that when you see the headlines, you have a mental picture of what that place might be like, you could read Alex Duvall's book, The Real Horn of Africa, the real politics of the Horn of Africa. Sudan is one of the countries mentioned there, Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the likes. And so you get us.
He's good. He was always good, whichever part of the continent he wrote about.
Yes. So again, the book is Alex Duval. It's The Real Politics of the Horn of Africa. And yes, so because what we want to do on here is not just debunk the wrong narratives, but also to give you a background into why those stories might be the way they are.
Right. And so just one final point that I want to make before we move on.
Yeah.
The saddest thing is this is a war for adults, right? Of adults being waged by children. You see?
Did you say
children who should be in school, children who should be getting training, job training, children who should not be killing other children and killing adults as well. But it's like becomes like a source of livelihood and living for these children as well. So they are the workers. They are basically the workers, while these generals, General Hemeti, General
Buvan.
Yeah, these are the like the capitalist exploitators. They are both multimillionaires in control of resources, in control of factories, and they're just throwing the children like the fodder, Yeah, General Burhan and General Hemeti.
Well, hopefully peace comes to. But one curious question before. What does the AU?
All right. So this is just one of the many symptoms of the complete failure of the AU. But the AU's failure is not surprising because the AU comprises the leadership of the individual African countries. So you can't be a misruler in your individual country, and then you come to meet in Addis Ababa, and suddenly you're converted into some sort of like
Statesman.
person who, like a Thomas Sankara. You can't become a Thomas Sankara in Addis Ababa during the conference, and then when you go back to your country, you are Burhan, you are Museveni, you are. I don't even know if Paul Biya still goes to these meetings. Paul Nasingba. So when we talk about the AU, we should not even talk about the AU. We should talk about what are the African misrulers doing. That would be synonymous with the AU. It's squandered,
opportunities.
Yeah, even beyond opportunities. I mean, this is an organ that could really be powerful. You see, we can't say everything is a squandered opportunity on the continent. So unity is squandered opportunity. Having policies that are pro-African, squandered opportunity. Getting rid of those artificial borders, squandered opportunity.
Education.
Yeah. But the youth want
change.
They want examples. They want a vision. They want leadership. They want motivation. That's why I'm very pro-youth. Do what you need to do. The youth so far have been supporting the changes in the alliance of Sahelian states. So that's what we need to see in more and more African countries. The youth are saying enough is enough. In Kenya, they're doing it in a different way, but it's the same thing. They are tired of the status quo. And in fact, here's the other irony. Young people have launched a global campaign on social media, which is very effective. And that's the power of social media as well. There's a campaign, don't ignore Gaza, don't ignore Sudan, don't ignore Congo. And they're tying all these conflicts together. They need to add Cameroon, though, to this, because now it's getting a lot of attention. You have celebrities. I was seeing Amanda Seals is involved in a podcast conversation, and people like that. She has like more than 2 million followers on IG, and that cannot be ignored by media, and then ultimately cannot be ignored by leadership in the Western countries. And it's so sad that it takes the intervention of Western countries. Well, often it's because they have their hands also behind the conflict to end these conflicts. They come to put off the fire that they themselves set, right? So when you support a Paul Biya in Cameroon, who's really responsible for the problem? The outside will say, oh, look, English-speaking part of Cameroon fighting against the French-speaking part, not knowing that the French-speaking so-called leader has been maintained 43 years.
1982.
By the French. You see? But unfortunately, our children are the ones that suffer. So we can't just say, oh, it's because so-and-so is supported by the West. We need to find creative ways to intervene. We need to force the hands of the leadership in these Western countries to stop doing the wrong thing. So be it. And it seems like social media is being helpful in that respect as well.
Okay. So, thank you. We move on to the next story, which comes from The Guardian too. And it's also that neck of the woods, and it relates to Mr. Rwanda, so Rwanda agrees to take up to 250 migrants from the U.S. Deal follows deportation to South Sudan and Eswatini, despite concerns about international law breaches. The lead reads, the Rwandan government said it would accept up to 250 from the U.S. under a deal agreed with Washington, but gave no details on who would be included. It goes on, the deal announced on Tuesday followed a council arrangement with Britain, under which Rwanda would have received asylum seekers arriving in the UK in small boats. The deal was scrapped after the Conservative government that negotiated it lost last year's general election. That's not the case, but we take that for now. Those who arrive in Rwanda will be provided with training, healthcare, and accommodation, she added. That's the spokesperson for the government. So, what is your take on this deal?
Well, it's human trafficking for cash, of course. And that was going to be paid and were paid by the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that deal ended, kept the money. So it's no way that Rwanda is going to absorb any cost for so-called training or accommodation and maintenance and feeding of 250 people from outside when it's struggling to feed its own people. And it needs to plunder resources from Congo and kill people in Congo to feed its own people. So why would it take this extra burden of cost? So even though no number is mentioned there, of course, eventually it will be revealed, right?
Okay.
It's hard for the U.S. to make any payment without, accounting for it. So, and that's number one. So that's what Kagame is doing. He's obviously, number one, it gets some money out of it, also develops a reliable relationship with the U.S. So they signed the peace agreement in the White House. And at some point, I don't know when, Kagame himself and President Tshisekedi are supposed to come to the White House. So obviously, he's not going to forego an opportunity like that to be seen at the White House.
Okay.
He's gotten a lot of criticism for human rights abuse within Rwanda, and of course for his war of aggression against Congo. What better way than to be seen as a peacemaker, being invited to the White House, posing for photographs with Trump, signing an agreement with Tshisekedi, witnessed by Trump. All the media will be there, right? And now you have this deal with the U.S. further solidifying your relationship. I don't think there's going to be time to be criticizing Rwanda over any human rights abuse going forward for the foreseeable future, right? Of course, there's the other aspect. Now that you've actually signed the peace agreement
with Congo
at the White House, it ties your hands in terms of your ability to have your military occupying Eastern Congo under the pretense that is, quote unquote, M23. You see? So I think he's factored all that into it, and he's seen that, okay, even if I have to withdraw M23, I'm still going to be in a strong position if I build this relationship with the United States. Let's say Trump is there for the next, 3.5 years. Find a way to work
with the
government in a way that benefits Rwanda for the next 3.5 years. And then after that, if I need to make new moves, I'll deal with it at that time. I think that's his thinking.
Said. So I suppose you've sort of answered the question, but then if you can buttress the point. What responsibilities do African states have to refuse such deals that may breach international refugees protection? Because the refugee law is once a person seeks status, in this case, it's a mix of both anyway. We don't know quite, but we sort of have an idea of what it is they're trying to do.
Well, obviously, if you're sending somebody to a country not of their choice, that's already a violation right there of international law. You see? The very few of them can refuse because they're not in a strong position. Big countries like Nigeria, of course, can refuse. And not surprisingly, Nigeria was hit with a high tariff rate, correct?
We'll take it.
South Africa can refuse. I'm not saying there's a direct tie-in, but I don't think it's a coincidence that South Africa is also one of the countries hit with a high tariff rate. I think Rwanda beat Uganda to the punch. You know, Museveni is a very devious dictator, and I won't be surprised if his people were like knocking on the door, willing to take. But you know, Rwanda, of course, Kagame sees Museveni as a mortal enemy as well, and Rwanda might have actually made that a condition that we'll take provided you don't have a similar deal with Uganda. I'm just speculating, but I wouldn't be surprised if Rwanda made that one of the conditions. Right. And Uganda, of course, was also retaliated with a higher tariff rate. So every country that was not listed on the new tariff rate, the tariffs would remain at 10%. Uganda was listed, so Uganda went up to 15%. The only country of the original East African members, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, whose tariff went to 15%.
So that said, would we say now that the West basically has just shredded every document that they've sort of built the so-called Western democracies on? They've torn up the issue.
But it's not that. It was all fiction anyway. How many resolutions of the United Nations has Israel defied with no consequence at all? We would not even be having the genocide that we're witnessing in Gaza today. Okay. So international law does not mean anything to the West unless it suits their interests, right? So the UN passed a resolution, a no-fly zone over Libya, basically, supposedly, to ensure that Gaddafi does not have access from outside weapons and also does not use his air force to bomb, quote unquote, and kill his own people. And what did they use that? So that to them was an important international law, right? Resolution, rather, just passed by the Security Council. And they used that to carry out regime change in Libya, right? So at that particular point, law was important to them. But I just gave you the example of Israel. So they defy international. It's not a question of defying. They never adhere to any international law unless it suits their interests. That's a better way of seeing it. So defying is not newsworthy. Obeying international law is when it would be newsworthy for the Western countries.
Okay. I get what you did there. Okay.
No, really.
Oh, we can only.
And in this case, wait, he's not deporting Norwegians to these countries, right? But he said he doesn't mind more immigrants so long as they come from Norway. He's not going to be deporting Norwegians to Rwanda or Eswatini.
Okay.
He's not going to be supporting any French nationals, any Britons, Scottish, Germans, He will be deporting the people who, in their mind, they are considered to be the wretched of the earth. And who's going to stand up for the wretched of the earth, the other wretched of the earth? And they ignore that just as they continue to ignore. So unless we, the wretched of the earth, change our condition, and we can, we have the resources. I keep reminding people, Dr. John Henry Clark said, Africa has always had the resources that the entire world has always wanted, and the entire world has never wanted to pay for. We have it. So that's how, Trump talks about, he told Zelensky, you don't have a card. We have many cards, but we don't play the cards. That is why we remain the wretched, and they continue to treat us like the wretched. You see?
That's indeed powerful. From that story, we move on to the economists who have decided to, remind us that we are basically, behind a pen. And so it reads, why it is a pain to take a plane in Africa. Bad connections, high fees, and strict visa rules hamper travel around the continent. And it goes on. It says, Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, is far from Lagos, Nigeria's commercial hub, as Berlin is from Athens. But whereas a round-trip ticket for the 3-hour flight from German capital to the Greek one can be for around $150, 150 euros, $173. Getting from Lagos to Freetown took your correspondent 2 flights, a ferry, and almost $2,000. The trip included a 7-hour layover in Ghana and required changing from a Nigerian to a Togolese airline. The cheaper option, a bit longer by 20 hours, would have been flying across the continent to Ethiopia before taking another plane west towards Sierra Leone. I mean, this is shocking.
No.
This is after close to 66 decades of, let me use the proper framing, flagged independence.
Yeah, but the story also shows you the neo-colonial agenda behind it, that they don't see what the real solution really is, right?
Okay, go on.
So yes, what is being said there is correct, but the implied solution is totally unrealistic. How many African countries are there?
54?
So the story is suggesting that there should be 54 efficient African airlines, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many airlines do you have in the United States? Ones that are national or international. That's not serving like local, regional, or doing, for business, commercial purposes. There's what? United, right?
United, American Airlines.
American Airlines.
And Delta.
Delta, right?
Yeah.
So if the US has 3, why are you implying that Africa needs 54 efficient airlines? You see? So, but an informed reader would say, yes, these damn Africans, right? Why can't you run 54 efficient airlines, right? The US doesn't do that. Europe doesn't do that. Why, obviously, the solution is that we don't need to have all these airlines. And it goes back to the same thing we discussed. We don't need all those borders either.
True.
We don't need all those countries either, right? You have Ethiopian airline, and Ethiopia has shown to the world that is no issue of African incompetence or nonsense like that. Ethiopia runs one of the most efficient, profitable airlines in the world. Ethiopia is supposed to be advising Russia how to make some of their airlines efficient. Think about that. So it's not because they're African or inadequate as African people. No, otherwise Ethiopia would not be running one of the most admired airlines in the world. So if the US has 3 or 4, why don't you have 4 or 5 using Ethiopia's business template? Have one that Ethiopia already has. Let Ethiopia run South African airline, which I don't even know if it's still running. They are having a lot of financial difficulties. It's probably grounded, right? Let Ethiopia run one in West Africa, right? And that's it. The North African countries have huge airlines like Egypt Air and all those Morocco that are doing quite well, actually. So that is what an interesting story by somebody who actually cares about Africa would look like, instead of just saying, I'm the Economist correspondent, and it was so convenient for me and my elite high standard of living to endure this inconvenience to get from point A to B. So that's my critique of the story. It's not a serious story.
So, I mean, still on that silly note, one question would be with you've touched on the airline question. It reminds me of, there was a story a couple of years ago, and I believe it was the Ethiopian Airlines, when those new model planes just came out and they were looking for investors. Some of those African countries, like you alluded to, could have looked into taking up the question, because Ethiopia actually put it out there that they were looking for African investors, national investors.
But they're not interested because it says Ethiopian Airlines. They want to have Burundi Airlines. They want to have Uganda Airlines. They want to have Rwanda Airlines. They want to have Congo Airlines.
Which is not sustainable.
Right? They want to have Kenya Airways. A powerful country like South Africa with, either the largest or second largest economy in African countries south of the Sahara. I think its airline was grounded. So South Africa cannot afford it. Why is a Uganda trying to run an airline? South Sudan, you can't even run an efficient bus service for your citizens, and you're trying to run an airline. You're focused on building good roads, having a good national bus transport system, and then focus on railroads for commuters as well as for economic goods and services. That's where you should be putting your money.
Not on white elephant bridge.
Are the ones that can afford to fly anyway. Who's going to be affording a ticket for $2,000 when per capita income for Uganda, the per capita income is $1,000 per year. There are only a handful of African countries that have per capita more than 2,000. Ghana is one, about 2,500, and Ghana is one of the better performing African economies. So you have Ghana, you have South Africa. That's about it. You have Gabon because of the oil.
Oil. And the size of the population.
Okay, 3 countries. Ethiopia, even with this expanding economy, its per capita is not beyond 2,000. See, you have Kenya. Kenya also is, but a handful is what I'm saying. And you're crying over airlines? No, the masses are not crying over airlines. The masses want roads that work. The masses want bus service so they can get to work. They can get from one part of the country to the next, or even visit, neighboring countries, buses, railways. And people want to eat, actually, and afford school fees. Those, to me, are bigger stories than the inconvenience of having to fly from one part of Africa to another in order to get to a neighboring country. That, to me, is nothing to shed tears about. You see?
Okay. I would say you've responded to the economist.
It is a priority story for that reporter who wrote it and inserted him or herself into the story, saying your correspondent had to endure a long wait, blah, blah, blah. You see? That does not sound like a priority story for an African on the ground to me. You see?
Yeah. I mean, he gave you the fact that he or she has collected enough air miles,
Yeah.
telling you the distance between Berlin and Athens.
Yep, absolutely.
So
it reminded me of what Rodney said. He said the issues that are priorities to the elite, sometimes are just amazing and shocking to everybody else. Because they inhabit a different universe, you see?
Yes, if you're just joining us, this is the African News Review. Do like, share, and subscribe. And also, just so you're informed, this is the 76th episode of African News Review. So we're here to stay. And yes, do support our Patreon. In the description, we normally leave our Patreon page there. Go ahead and support us, because we hope to grow this channel to reframe the narrative about Africa is a worthy cause, and please support. So We come on to our final story for the day, and surprise, surprise, it reads, it's from Deutsche Welle. This is the German news agency, and it reads, Germany suspends arm export to Israel for use in Gaza. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz cited Israel's plan to take over Gaza City as a reason for the decision, marking a major policy change. It goes on. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said on Friday that Berlin would not approve German weapons export to Israel for use in the Gaza Strip until further notice. The announcement marks a major change in the course for Germany, which has been one of Israel's staunchest international allies. Came as Israel's security cabinet approved a plan to take over Gaza City, with the government saying it was a necessary move to destroy Hamas and free the remaining hostages held in Gaza. Israel's decision has prompted international condemnation and opposition from hostage families who say the plan endangers their loved ones. That's the strip after it's been leveled, and it beggars belief that in light of what happened a couple of decades ago, we will see such stuff. So a bit of background. From 2020 to 2024, Germany accounted for a third of Israel's incoming arms supply. Germany's arms supply to Israel has included armor vehicles, trucks, anti-tank weapons, and ammunition. Anti-tank weapons. The last time I checked, their adversaries were not rolling around in tanks. But hey, what do I know?
Right.
What say you?
Okay. All right. So, first of all, what you just pointed out is very significant. They don't have any armored vehicles, right? When they have been liquidated, and I say purportedly liquidated because obviously they've killed so many civilians. So when they say they killed Hamas fighters, you take it with a grain of salt. But when they've been liquidated, they're normally driving in, like pickup, vehicles, right? That are just disintegrated with those anti-tank missiles or missiles fired from air-to-surface missiles, or missiles that are now being fired against children from ships. And this whole mantra of the need to eliminate Hamas, 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 we have to weigh the conduct of the Israeli Defense Force as well. So Hamas is an organization that has committed acts of terrorism. What about the Israeli Defense Force?
The response.
This killing of all these civilians, that's not an act of terror, you see? But of course, they won't raise these questions. They'll never raise these questions because the bottom line is the major media outlets that have global outreach are corporate. Even the BBC is corporate, right? It not be like a regular C corporation, but it's still a corporation. Yeah, the way it's run, it has like a executive structure, and it conforms with a type of political context in which the range is prescribed by the political, umbrella that actually governs it, which is the British government. And the British government has a particular type of attitude toward Israel, right? And that is directly reflected even in the BBC. So all of these corporate, as we have said in our previous show, they are part of the problem, actually. Yeah, they have become like weapons of mass destruction, right? So I say that just for people to, because sometimes they keep telling you this and this and that to prevent you from thinking broader context. We only do not see the Israel Defense Force as a terrorist organization because it's a quote unquote professional army with a professional structure, generals, brigadiers, colonels, lieutenants, and all that. funded by the state, right? With a budget that is passed by the state, getting weapons from state to state, from the United States, and in this particular case from Germany, right? But examine what they have been doing, really. The actions must speak louder than the words and perception. So I like people to start thinking like that. So I wanted to just get that out of the way first. But in terms of Germany coming to that position, it's very, very significant because Germany, for the longest while, its policy toward Israel has been conducted based on the Holocaust guilt. When the German state under the Nazi regime exterminated, millions of Jews. And so since then, their politics has been really dictated by that crime that they committed. But even in this case, it seems that it's reaching its limit, you see, even in the case of Germany. I mean, Germans are one of the most educated of all the Europeans, right? With one of the largest, powerful economies in Europe. So you're telling me that I am watching what's happening in Gaza as an African. I'm watching it from the United States. And the Germans are watching the same thing that I'm seeing. And I'm seeing that this is a genocide, particularly with this new phase of starvation, genocide by starvation. You're telling me that regardless of what the German government's attitude is toward Israel and its policy, the German people themselves are not seeing what I'm seeing and coming to the same conclusion? I can't believe that. And I don't believe that at all. So it looks like that pressure is now building. Even the German chancellor himself is seeing what I'm seeing. The legislators, what do they call it? The Bundes, whatever.
Bundestag.
Right. Their parliament.
The Reichstag.
The ministers of the government. They're seeing it, and you can only lie to yourself for so much. And it looks like that lie is reaching its limit in Germany, in Britain, and France, and other European countries. That lie that you could not convince Africans with, because South Africa was way early out there of filing that lawsuit in the International Court of Justice, you see. So forget all the pretense. Many of those countries are now arriving at the same location which South Africa had arrived in early 2024.
Exactly, 2024. Right. So at the beginning, I said the news story in Britain ties into this story. There was a group that took direct action. The name of the group is Palestine Action. The group was subsequently proscribed in the most fastest way any group has been proscribed in this country and considered a terrorist organization. But clearly the local population said, well, this is a miscarriage of justice. This country prides itself on direct action, the right to protest. And so they've been out in the streets protesting that proscription. But the government then went a step further that if you hold up a placard or you wear a T-shirt purporting to support that group, Palestine Action, you would be arrested. When the action was first done a couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago now, there were a couple of 83-year-olds, maybe about 14 of them that were arrested. 83-year-olds, Last weekend, a protest was organized where they said they were looking for volunteers to be arrested. The number they wanted to push, because what happened is when a law goes into effect here and the law is being challenged, there is what is known as a judicial review. So the judicial review would look at whether that law is in the interest of the public. If it's not, then it would be struck off the books. But in order to get that judicial review or to feed into it, a arrest protest was organized. So what they wanted was 500 people to turn up in front of Parliament holding placards that they support Palestine Action. Guess what happened?
They had 2,000.
Initially, 500 showed up. So the police came in, arrested 356, and then they stopped. While they were arresting that 356 to take them away, another 500 moved into that square.
Excellent.
So you get a sense that, like you said, what you're seeing, everybody else in the world is now seeing. And it's the scene has gone beyond the pale, especially when you're starving people. When you said never again, you meant it. You should mean it. You should mean it. Because the pictures, the images coming out of Gaza does not paint the so-called democracies in a good light. I was speaking to my brother the other day. I say, do you notice that they basically just destroyed every fabric of the democratic society? The International Court of Justice, the Human Rights Convention, the Geneva Convention, the law when it comes to war, the use of starvation in going after. I said, basically, they don't have anything.
The media.
Thank you very much. The media.
Think about that.
The media. When the media has lost.
That is the most shameful, but in a way good, because it exposed the hypocrisy.
Yes.
That whole media objective, professional, blah, 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 all nonsense that we've been critiquing for years. And now you prove. In fact, the most recent example was Libya.
Yes.
When they all ganged up saying, oh, bomb him, take him out. Yeah. Boom.
And the country will be better.
This is another good example of media hypocrisy, showing that there's no such thing as objective, independent media. The only independent media are outlets such as this, where nobody else is signing your check. You can talk about any topic, take any perspective. So, that is what is being exposed in the United Kingdom also.
I'll just buttress the point again with the on the media angle. Here, what you've had the media do is the BBC, which is supposed to obviously show you what is going on in the world, give you the right angle, are playing two sides. There is no two sides to a genocide. The genocide is happening. There is no but. It is happening before you. There is no but. So recently, there was a group that looked into the BBC's coverage of Gaza from October 7 till June this year and found the way the reporting has been skewed is in some cases, there's the story of the girl, Rajab Hind, that she lost her folks in the car and she dialed for help and help was coming to her. The mother of Raja Hind, the way it was covered here, leaves much to be desired. We've not even spoken about the medics that were basically waylaid, executed, and their trucks buried. And the story coming out from the IDF at the time was they didn't have their lights on, there was no marker, there was no identifier and everything.
I think, to be honest with you, even looking at these individual stories in itself is form of a media spin. We really don't need to analyze each of these individual stories. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're not collectively saying that Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinian people, that is the most outrageous thing. If it was the reverse, can you imagine Arabs, right? Decimating all those cities in Israel, starving Israeli children? There would be a single media outlet that's not referring to the Arab genocide against the Israelis. That to me is end of story right there. Everything else is just a way to trick people into what is there to analyze. This is a clear-cut case of genocide. It would not be tolerated if it was being committed against European people. Yes. Yeah. Again, we continue to do this work. Again, do like, share, and subscribe.
join our Patreon. And again, we thank Comrade for coming through. Sister Aya is in Egypt. She's on a study tour of Egypt. She would be back in 2 weeks. But before then, I would like to thank everybody that come through. You know, you've been supportive of this podcast for, like I said earlier, 75 episodes in. This will be the 76th. So continue to like, share, and subscribe. And bring a friend to bring a friend to bring a friend. We hope to grow this channel. And again, my thanks goes to Comrade Milton Allimadi, who immediately just said, when I reached out to him, said, let's do this. We've got work to do. I believe those were your words, actually. We've got work to do. So that said, any final thoughts from you?
I look to continue. Victory is certain.
Thank you very much. And from me, it's good night and God bless. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.